I'm on a quest to beat and rate every single PlayStation 2 RPG, TRPG, action RPG, and everything in between. That's over 160 titles. After I beat a game, I'll be making a video where I go through the 10 things I liked and 10 things I did not like in my playthrough. I'll also be giving each game an overall rating and comparing it to the other completed titles. If you want to see my full playthrough, check out my second channel, Low Cloud Aim Gameplay. Now let's get started.
Made in heaven.
Restraint is something I often find lacking in media these days. Most creative works coming out in film, literature, and video games seem to have a lack of restraint, leading to directionless stories, jumbled character development, and unclear expectations. I don't think there's ever been a situation where I thought, hey, this game could have used a little less restraint. That is until I played Final Fantasy XII for this challenge. The restraint in this title could be infuriating at times, and now I'm going to talk about it. Now, I can't start this retrospective without addressing the controversial topic of which version is the optimal version of this game. Like I've mentioned in past reviews, I can play remasters of PS2 titles, just not remakes. So I had a choice. Do I play the original PS2 version, or do I play the international version, later re-released as the Zodiac Age for the PS4 and Switch? Each has their merits, and I wouldn't dissuade anyone from picking up and playing the original, but for me, the Zodiac Age on modern day consoles is the definitive way to play Final Fantasy XII. The restrictions of the classes make character progression and team synergy interesting, and the placement of certain items help make the endgame content more rewarding. If you're new to the channel, why don't you subscribe? Also, if you want to see a breakdown of every PS2 title I plan on completing, along with the scores of games I have already beaten, you can click on the link in the description of this video. Now, with all that out of the way, let's jump into the review. If you would like to skip the details and just see a summary of my thoughts, skip ahead to the time on the screen. For everyone else, here are 10 things I liked and 10 things I did not like about Final Fantasy XII: The Zodiac Age. Dislike 10. No quest markers. Final Fantasy XII's side quests are vast, and keeping in check all the little threads, be it character conversations, hunts, or locations you need to go to, can be very difficult. Funny enough, the game has this handy little mini-map, which is used simply to navigate a small area and see enemies. I wish they had thrown quest icons on the mini-map and menu map. Jak 2 did this long before Final Fantasy XII, so the feature was out there. The stupidest part of this is that when you take on a hunt, a monster is marked on your map. If you go to your menu, click on the Clan Centurio, scroll down the menu, click into the monster you're hunting, then press square. You'll see their location. Why do this? Why not have it out on your map? I honestly do not understand the logic behind this. As you'll see as we continue, this restrained approach to game design creates many of Final Fantasy XII's flaws. Like 10. The voice acting.
End of the line.
Now, I haven't completed all 160 titles yet, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Final Fantasy XII has some of the best voice work this generation has to offer. Not only is the sound design on point, but the casting for each character was masterfully done, especially Fran.
What happened? Our hover didn't just drop, it disappeared.
Forget it. Even if we could fly, the Ifrit's playing with fire, and I'd rather not get burned.
I mean, what is this accent? So, from what I can tell, the actress is Nicole Frantel, who is Australian but did an Icelandic accent for the character. Whatever it is, it's perfect. Honestly, my only gripe with the voice acting is that I wish there had been more of it. A lot of the main cast goes unvoiced, including Montblanc of the Hunters Guild and Rickon's crew. But what is there is fantastic and goes a long way to engaging you in the world of Ivalice.
He enlisted right at the end. But for what? He knew he couldn't win.
To protect something.
How can he protect anything when he's dead? Was it different for Prince Rassler? Did that make sense?
Dislike 9. Call the DEI police. The world of Ivalice has never looked better than in the 12th installment of Final Fantasy. There's a reason this has become one of the most recognizable worlds in the Final Fantasy canon. This world is populated by humans, Muggles, Vera, these lizard dudes, and ugly dog guys. There are so many different races, so why is my team made up of the Brady Bunch? I mean, don't get me wrong, I do like this cast. It's less about what they did include, and more about what they did not include. For example, there has only been a single time in Final Fantasy history that you could have a Moogle in your party, and that was way back in Final Fantasy VI. Why don't I have a Moogle in my party? Or how about this guy? He's cool. Thank goodness for Fran, who manages to be the most diverse member of the cast of 6. Could you imagine if they had introduced the Vera but not given you one as a party member? Luckily, this wasn't made in 2024.
I'm Kim Belair, and I'm CEO of Sweet Baby Inc.
Look, I've leveled this criticism to Final Fantasy and RPGs as a whole in previous videos, but bring back weird party members. Kate Sith, Umaro, Kamari, Vivi, Quina. Why is it that as time goes on, party members become increasingly more boring looking? Like 9. The accessories. Speaking of things I've mentioned before, I really appreciate good equipment. Nothing makes me happier than a necklace, hat, or gauntlets that goes further than just improving my defense. Armor and weapons have varying passive abilities that make me happy, but the accessories are where the passives really shine. Accessories like the Genji gloves, which increase the chances of a multi-hit, or anything that gives you an infinite buff like the bubble belt. Some battles have unique debuffs that can be thwarted by having the right accessories. Or you can just equip something like the Germanis boots, which immensely buffed Vaughn's speed. One of my favorite accessories, and one that was very handy in defeating the super boss Yezmat, was the Turtle Shell Choker, which uses gil instead of MP for spells. Seeing as by the end of the game I had over 6 million gil, this made spamming support spells no problem. I could talk about the Hermes sandals or the Sage's ring, but I think you get the picture. The accessories were amazing. Considering how the game played, I kinda wish that characters had 2 accessory slots instead of 1. You see what I mean by Restraint? It was good, but could have gone further. 2 slots wouldn't have overly broken an already broken title, but whatever. Dislike 8. The music is great, but the music of Final Fantasy XII was led by Hitoshi Sakimoto, with Nobuo Uematsu only composing the ending theme. Now, I have always found Hitoshi's music to be slightly overhyped, if I'm being honest. It just never gelled with me. But let me say this, the soundtrack of Final Fantasy XII is absolutely superb, especially if you play with the orchestrated soundtrack, which is an option in the remaster. Seriously, this OST flew under the radar for me for a long time. I can't believe I didn't notice songs like The Osmond Plains, Eru Village, Draklor Laboratory, and one of my personal favorites, newly added in the Zodiac Age version, Fury of the Entities. Now, one might be asking at this point, okay, cool Chandler, so the music's good. What's your dislike? Well, here it is. Final Fantasy XII does not have any battle tracks. Yes, it has boss music, but aside from those scripted battles, there are no other instances where the music changes during battle. For some areas, this works fine. The music of the Mastron High Waste works great in these quick battles. But then you get into areas like Feywood or the Cerobi Steppe, which are more slow-moving atmospheric pieces. They just don't work well. I understand that battles are quick, so a full-blown musical piece cutting in and out would be disruptive and awkward. But Kingdom Hearts had quick battles, and they still did a faded-in battle track version of whatever area you were in. Where this lack of battle music is felt the most is during hunts and when using the limit break-like abilities called quickenings. Hunts are some of the most intense battles in the entire game, and if you just so happen to be hunting a monster in the Celica Wood, it feels like you're battling in the middle of an Enya concert. Quickenings are even worse. These over-the-top, epic animations are often accompanied by some of the strangest tracks in the game. Either way, I think the developers missed an opportunity to build dynamic battle tracks that kicked into the area theme. Again, Restraint. Like 8, experience and license points. Something clever that Final Fantasy XII pulls off is that you get nothing for free. Every skill, weapon, ability, or advancement comes via actions of the player. This is clever game design if done correctly because it makes exploring, experimentation, and leveling worth the player's time. No matter what you do in this title, you'll most likely get something for your troubles. This is accomplished mainly through the license board. By using license points, or LP, you can unlock titles on this board that coincide with everything from equipment and stats to skills and magic. But simply unlocking a tile doesn't automatically give you the associated skill, spell, or weapon. You need to then find it out in the world of Ivalice. Because of this, simply grinding your character's level and LP doesn't automatically make you stronger. Exploration, side quests, and even gil are required in order to progress your character as well. I like this approach. Sure, some important skills are found in ridiculous spots, and yes, it is annoying to unlock certain abilities early on in your license board, only to find them in the late game. But even with these annoyances, the progression here really did motivate me to go after the side content. Everything felt so rewarding, as finding a new katana from a license board you unlocked just leaves you with a satisfying feeling. Dislike 7. Vain. In a story, the hero is only as heroic as the villain is threatening. This is why iconic duos like Batman and Joker, Cloud and Sephiroth, Link and Ganon, and Sonic and Robotnik work so well. Villains are an integral part of a narrative as they set the stakes our heroes have to overcome. When Vayne is first introduced, you feel the threat he poses to the people. He's a silk-tongued politician whose empire took over Ash, Vaughn, and Penella's home. His speech at the beginning sets him up well as the overwhelming imposing force that our heroes have to fight against. But that is all the heavy lifting this story is willing to pull. After this, Vayne ends up as a quiet character who shows up every once in a while to do exactly what he did in the beginning, which is give some overly worded speech about practically nothing. Never do we see him do anything evil, devious, or threatening. Never do our heroes come face to face with him in a confrontation. No, we just hear about how bad he is. And that's a terrible way to develop a villain. Now, some of you might be reading a comment saying that Gabranth is the main villain, and halfway through the game, I would have agreed with you. That is until Gabranth is completely castrated in front of the player. This moment in the narrative, where the Emperor is murdered and Vayne takes over, is pivotal to the story, and it's handled in the worst kind of way. First of all, it's implied that Vayne killed his father, but did Vayne have some loyal soldiers do it? Did he kill the Emperor himself? If we could have seen what happened, it would have gone a long way to developing his character. But then this scene goes even further in destroying the villain's threat. The judges, these imposing armored characters who up to this point have been the main source of opposition to our heroes, get completely stripped of any menace the narrative had previously set up. As soon as this dime store Fabio makes his intentions known, they all turn on each other, arguing like children. They pull a Kylo Ren and take off their helmets, putting a human face behind the threatening mask of metal. Then Gabranth, whom seemed like he was going to be a Darth Vader-like character, willingly kills one of the judges to show his loyalty to Vayne. All in all, after this point, none of the villains seemed all that threatening. And to add insult to injury, the ending turns Vayne into the most generic, stereotypical Final Fantasy boss I have ever seen. I have not witnessed a more egregious cop-out of a villain since Lost Odyssey's Gongora. It's disappointing that so much went into Final Fantasy XII's setup of villains, only to see each one fall flat. Like 7. Weapon variety. There is nothing I love more than aesthetic changes to equipment in video games. I absolutely love the Trails series, but one of my major gripes of those titles is that your weapons don't change when you get new equipment. Final Fantasy XII's art direction is masterful, and this is incredibly evident in the love that went into each of these weapons' design. First of all, there are like dozens of different weapons. Swords, great swords, katanas, ninja swords, spears, staves, bows, crossbows, guns, hand bombs. The list goes on and on. Each has a unique design that is considerate of the world. A lot of times in RPGs, weapons can be wildly out of place. Sometimes this is intentional, other times it's not. I have never been a big fan of Cloud's ultimate sword in Final Fantasy VII. Starting out with the Buster Sword, a weapon that is a perfect summary of that game's theme, and ending with this pseudo lightsaber is disappointing to say the least. But looking at these weapons, I can't help but imagine the story behind some of them. They fit Ivalice to a T, and that's important. I think my favorites were the ninja swords. Their design is great, and though it's Eastern inspired and might have broken the continuity of the story, they felt like something you would find in Ivalice. Dislike 6. The Imbalances. Unfortunately, Final Fantasy XII is an imbalanced game. Though the license board tries to keep things in check, it is just so easy to overlevel or overequip your character. Now, a lot of this is hidden, so I guess there's that. But if you play this title, you'll realize quickly that it was developed with the requirement of a guide in mind. So it only takes a single Google search to realize just how broken Final Fantasy XII is. First of all, in the very first open area, you can grind levels using a simple exploit with a unique monster. If you go to this location and have a party member's HP in the red, you can go over to the next screen and use a Phoenix Down to kill the undead type monster Dustia. Simply throw out the Phoenix Down, wait for his HP to drop, then dash over to the other screen. Do this a few times and you'll already be over leveled. And from this point, if you're doing all the hunts, any story section of the game will be an absolute cakewalk. Why this is such an issue is that this essentially ruins the main plot of the story. Remember how I talked about Gabranth, the Darth Vader-like character and antagonist of the main party? Yeah, here's my first battle with him.
Hear me, Bosch. Do not think killing the Kingslayer will win you back your honor. When you abandoned home and kin, your name was forever stained with blood.
Like 6. The Imbalances. Sure, the imbalances suck and make the narrative ridiculously stupid as no scripted battle holds weight. But that's not why you're here. Playing a game for the enveloping stories for saps. You're here to break this game over your knee, and my goodness, can you break this title. In the Zodiac Age version, if you pick the right job combinations, there isn't a single enemy that can stand up to you. In the original version, with access to the entire license board, this reality is even more evident. Here, let me give you an example of how easy it is to break this game. Here's Yezmat, one of the most notorious ultimate bosses in the entire Final Fantasy franchise. Here's me, using the builds I had throughout the game, trying to beat him. I fought Yezmat 4 times, and each time I died just as I reached a third of his ridiculous health bar. Now, here's me fighting Yezmat with only a simple tweak. I changed Ash from a Bushi Knight class to a Bushi Monk class. I also went out and got the break spells Expose and Wither, which permanently decrease an enemy's attack and defense. I spent the first few minutes casting Expose and Wither, then proceeded to easily wallop one of the hardest bosses in the game. And you know what? I had a blast. Sure, the imbalances ruined some of the experience. Fortunately, what remains is almost a sandbox of godlike abilities and builds. Dislike 5. The dungeons suck. I hate boring dungeons. I can't stand them. The inspiration for almost every single RPG is Dungeons and Dragons. We often screw up the dungeons and sometimes even the dragons aspect of these games. Final Fantasy XII has 2 dungeon varieties, Ancient Stone Temple and Mine. I am not kidding. Either you're waltzing around in a mine, which there are multiple, or you're waltzing around a stone temple with so little variety that I forget which is which. And don't get me started on the mechanics. The amount of bullshit this title throws at you is ridiculous. For example, in both the Great Crystal Dungeon and the upper floors of Pharos, you just lose access to your minimap. Why? Who the hell knows? It's not like the minimap would ruin any of the mechanics in these dungeons. In Pharos, half the floors are hidden from the map anyway. And while we're on the topic, the Great Crystal may be one of the single worst RPG dungeons I have ever experienced. I'm trying to think of something worse, but I'm coming up blank. There is just no way to do this without a guide. A player will be stuck here for hours, unknowingly making the same mistakes over and over and over again. I eventually turned to a guide, and guess what? It was still a confusing cluster. I cannot believe this thing was greenlit. The worst part is that Hastega, one of the only spells that makes the Time Mage worth it, is hidden here, and I ended up finding Ultima long before I found this damn spell. Luckily, the open world areas are pleasant and make up the other half of exploration. Like 5. Espers. Summons, or Espers if you like, in Final Fantasy XII are practically useless in battle. For some odd reason, the developers didn't just let a summon become a 4th party member. Instead, they remove your 2 other party members and their gambit and replace it with the summon for a set amount of time. All things considered, there is almost no reason to summon them. But what I find fascinating is that summons play an incredibly important role in an entirely different way. Now, before I jump into that, allow me to gush for just a moment over these designs. The Final Fantasy series has an issue with member berries. Remember Ifrit? Remember Shiva? Remember Bahamut? Surprisingly, the devs of Final Fantasy XII were like, nah, let's make our own. And damn, did they make some iconic summons. It's sad that they've never really been revisited in the mainline titles. You have Zalera, the Death Seraph, who's pretty much the Grim Reaper with his main squeeze as his wing. You have Chuchulain, the Impure, who in the few brief moments you see him ends up developing a unique personality. Famfrit, Ultima, Exodus are all also amazingly detailed in their design. One of my personal favorites is the mermaid-esque Mateus the Corrupt, whose sexy aesthetic only gets more intricate the more you look at it. The designs for the Espers is top-notch, but so is their purpose. Sure, they're useless in battle, but that's okay, as the devs decided to lock cross-job skills behind the Esper's tiles on the license board. Only a single party member can be assigned an Esper. This means that if you want your knight to have Kiraja, you'll need to give that party member Ultima. This slight detail makes obtaining Espers all the more important. Giving your Mechanist haste or your White Mage greatswords can be a game changer for some builds. And all of that is why the Espers are so important. I love this kind of restricted game design. Things that make the player consider their strategy as a whole before making a singular choice will always be a welcome mechanic in my book. Dislike 4. Bosch. What happened here? You know what? Don't answer that. I know most of you know the answer. It goes something like, originally Bosch was going to be the main character, but then they decided to make Vaughn the MC due to appeal. Look, I don't actually care too much about the history of development for these titles. I want to know, are they still good all these years later? For Final Fantasy XII, the answer is yes. But the party member Bosch is treated so poorly that it actually takes me out of the experience. When you first jump into this title and take control of someone, it ends up being Vaughn's brother Rex. Rex is a newly recruited soldier in Bosch's retinue, and they are tasked with infiltrating the palace and saving the king. Now, with all the pompous circumstance, what with Bosch being believed to have killed the king and betrayed Dalmasca, and Rex's perspective being the player's very first experience, you might think that both these characters were pivotal in the narrative. Rex is hardly mentioned, but that's okay, because Vaughn takes his place as the avatar for the player. But Bosch? Man, what happened here? His intro and subsequent reintroduction to the player is done so well. Bosch is a prisoner of the Empire. Vaughn and team break him out after he reveals that not he, but his twin brother, who is Gabranth, slayed the king. All he wants to do is join the rebellion and protect his princess. Pretty cool, right? But from this moment forward, Bosch pretty much says and does nothing. In Bujerba, he has a role to play, but aside from that, he's just a background character. The guy has maybe a page of dialogue for 3/4 of the game. The ending tries to rope him back in, but really, what more is there to say between him and Gabranth? Oh, and this implied possible romance between him and Ash at the end is so unbelievable that it's just best ignored. Throw Bosch out and replace him with a Moogle party member, and you have a better game. Like 4. The main cast chemistry. Now, Bosch aside, the cast of Final Fantasy XII works. They're pretty well written, at least when it comes to their interactions with each other. I suppose I'll start with the least impressive, Penelo. Penelo's relationship with Vaughn is cute, and early on there are some good moments, but ultimately she ends up being forgettable. The story wraps up from her perspective, which was a strange choice to say the least. Vaughn actually stands the test of time here. I was never a huge Vaughn fan when I was young, but this playthrough ended up improving my opinion of him. He's best cast as the comic relief. He's young and says stupid things, and everyone in the party recognizes this.
Fran,
Yes?
I was wondering what Yote said, you know? About how you said the same thing 50 years ago?
Your point?
How old were you again?
Nice fun.
Surprisingly rude.
Try to grow up, please.
I especially love his interactions with Princess Ash. Their banter often made me smile.
What are you doing? This is Balthier's ship.
I'm going to retrieve the Dawn Shard. It's the proof that I need. I know where it's hidden. I'll return his airship later.
Are you crazy?
This is something that I have to do. Not only for myself, but for all those who have fallen. I will not be made to hide. I'll fight alone if I must.
You still have Bosch, right? Besides, you can't just go around stealing people's ships. What are you trying to do?
I'm trying to concentrate.
Ash is the true MC of Final Fantasy XII, and early 2000s Square Enix should have just had the balls to commit to that. She carries the different story beats once she's introduced, and the narrative revolves entirely around her. Is she an interesting character? Not particularly. But her history does a lot of the heavy lifting here. I love that she was married and has to deal with the trauma of losing her husband. You don't see that often in the Final Fantasy series. And this brings me to the best character in the game, Elza. Just kidding, it's Balthier. Some wish that Balthier was the MC, or in his words,
I'm a leading man.
but he works the best in a supporting role. He, along with his Wookiee, Vera co-pilot Fran, just makes this cast sing. I absolutely love their vague relationship. Are they a couple? Are they companions? What is their history? This is a well-tread and long-tested trope that I will never get sick of. All in all, I liked the cast here. Sure, they could have been more diverse, but what we got was good, even great at times. Dislike 3. The battle system was almost great. Before I shoot into this, I want to say one thing. I applaud the developers for departing so drastically from what previous Final Fantasy battle systems had done in the past. It's games like this that paved the way for truly innovative titles. We wouldn't have Persona 5 without Persona 3. We wouldn't have Elden Ring without Demon Souls. And we wouldn't have the addictive combat of newer Square titles like Final Fantasy XVI or Final Fantasy VII Rebirth without Final Fantasy XII and XIII. Now, with that being said, this battle system has issues. As a kid, I really didn't get how things worked. Assigning attacks to each party member was cumbersome, and the gambit system seemed optional. All these years later, I get it now. Half the fun of Final Fantasy XII is programming your party members' actions, then watching the results. The gambit system was truly innovative, and again, I applaud the novelty here. But there's one big issue. The RPG I played before Final Fantasy XII was Vanillaware's Unicorn Overlord. In that game, you use a system very similar to the gambit system, but unlike Final Fantasy XII, you can have two determining inputs where Final Fantasy XII only gives you one. Let me explain. The gambit system is simply a if-then program. If the enemy is close, then attack. If my health is below 60%, then heal. If a party member doesn't have the haste buff, cast Hastega. On paper, this would seem to work great, but what about a single-use debuff like slow? Obviously, I would love for my party members to cast slow on the enemy, but I want my party members to stop casting once the enemy is inflicted with the debuff and attack afterwards. Now, for that example, I found a somewhat useful solution. I made a gambit that said if the enemy is 100% HP, cast slow. My other party members would usually damage the enemy after the first casting, which made this gambit functional. I applied that same logic to steal, though with less favorable results. I cannot believe there isn't a gambit that says if there's an item available, then steal. Now you might be saying, well, that's where player input comes in. Yeah, but let's be real. Inputting commands in this game sucks. The fun isn't manually controlling your character. It's in programming them to react to different tactics. Unicorn Overlord fixes this immense flaw so easily by simply putting in a secondary option. If A and B, then C. Again, they had the fortune of coming long after Final Fantasy's Gambit system was created and all the knowledge that came with it. But again, I'm doing this to ask, are these still good games? Final Fantasy XII is a great game and worth playing today, but its battle system is lacking, plain and simple. Like 3. The art direction and character design. Akihiko Yoshida's unique art style never disappoints. Vagrant Stories, Tactics Ogre, Bravely Default, and the Nier series. Man, this guy can design worlds that satisfy. And in this humble YouTuber's opinion, Final Fantasy XII's Ivalice is his best work. Maybe it's Nier. Every NPC, town or village, monster, esper, and concept art is designed so well that you could make spin-off games of many of them. Rabanastra stands out as one of my favorite starting towns of any RPG. I love the pseudo-Arabian style of the character clothing, the desert landscapes, and the people that fill it. And the main cast? Man, here are some superb examples. Ignore Bosch. Not only is his character writing abysmal, but the outfit he lands on for the majority of the game is just boring. I so wish you could have kept him in his armor. Anyway, the only other weakly designed character in my opinion is Pinello. Now, I'm talking about Penelo for the majority of the game. I don't know why they would whip out this design at the end, only to not let you have her dressed like this. Her design in the DS sequel Revenant Wings is even better, but these stupid looking pigtails, strange bangs, and bulky boots don't quite do it for me. One design I'm torn on is Ash. It's definitely, interesting. I think what bugs me about it is that it has a little too much of the modern day 2000s trends in its concept. The bubblegum pink miniskirt is a little too Britney Spears-ish if you catch my drift. Fran, Vaughn, and Balthier are perfect. I absolutely love these designs. Fran specifically stands out as the star of the cast when it comes to design. You know, you could have made a lot of mistakes with a bunny girl-esque character. Here, more than anything, is where Restraint went a long way. Vaughn, when it comes to his design, once again grew on me in a way he hadn't before. They really did capture the essence of an immature kid punching above his weight. I like his hair too. I don't really have something clever to say about it. I don't know, think it's cool. Dislike 2. You want to buy a guide? I absolutely hate the practice of video games being made with a guide in mind. During the 90s and 2000s, before the internet was widely used, this bordered on predatory, as more and more often games would have ridiculous and even maliciously vague requirements for progression. Requirements that were made so guides would sell. Final Fantasy XII is no exception. Now, luckily for me, I am not one of the alpha gamers who thinks using a guide is for wusses who don't speedrun Sekiro for breakfast each morning. I often compile basic info on games before I play them. This ensures that I don't get caught up in some time-wasting scheme dreamed up by the developer. I did this with Final Fantasy XII. But when I actually thought about what I was doing, I kept thinking, who the hell would even know what to do here? Did you know, in the Ogre Yensa Sandsea, if you chain together 100 of the Urutan enemies, then go to this specific place, there's a special enemy that might show up, which if killed, has a rare chance of dropping a katana. I do, because I spent nearly 2 hours trying to get it. Did you know that in order to advance the main storyline, you would need to remember, in the late game mind you, that Bellius, the very first Esper you received nearly 20 gameplay hours ago, has the title of Gigas. When you reach this door, you will be given a cryptic message that states that it is the Gigas Gate. How in the hell are you supposed to know that you need to summon Bellius in order to open this gate? Not once before, nor after, do you need to summon an Esper in order to open a gate. I personally think it's a cool mechanic if it had been explained and then utilized throughout. If you Google Final Fantasy XII Gigas Gate, you will see entire forums dedicated to how stupid this is, and I don't blame them. All in all, I'm a firm believer that you should be able to beat every game without a guide, but tell that to my younger self giving up at the Water Temple in Zelda, and my older self trying to get past the Gigas Gate. Like 2. The job system. I mentioned at the top of this video that the international version of Final Fantasy XII, which is the version that was remastered in the Zodiac Age, is the better version. This mainly boils down to how the job system is handled. In the original American release, there were no jobs, and instead every character started in a certain section of the license board. Eventually you could unlock other sections and build your party member into really whatever you want. When I beat the original, I found this to be a little boring, as after a while there was little strategy involved in building your characters. In TZA, whenever you receive a party member, you will pick from 12 jobs. Ulan, Bushi, Machinist, Shikari, White Mage, Red Battle Mage, Monk, Foebreaker, Archer, Knight, Time Battle Mage, Black Mage. The chosen job unlocks that specific license board for that character. Once you reach a certain point in the story, you can assign a second job to each party member. I absolutely adore class systems like this. I spent an absurd amount of time testing out different combos. You can easily reset your character classes, with the only caveat being that you have to very slowly assign all of their license points again, which is a pain. But job assignment is pivotal in this title. Just look at my example with the super boss Siesmet. All it took was 2 new skills and a secondary job change to completely obliterate him. My main party consisted of Vaughn as a Shikari Red Mage, Ash as a Bushi Knight, later changed to a Bushi Monk, and a full-on magic support Penelo as a White Mage Time Mage. You can switch in different party members, and for a while at the beginning I used Fran. Unfortunately, her stats suck, and I eventually switch over to Penelo. Nothing is more satisfying than spending a 70-hour playthrough, fine-tuning your party members' jobs, and watching them devastate bosses in seconds. I don't know if I've played another game with such a satisfying job system. Dislike 1. The narrative. For all of its unique style and gameplay substance, Final Fantasy XII's story is kind of terrible. Putting aside some of the fun interactions between the cast, there is almost nothing here that drew me in. An easy way to discern a good story from a bad story is how it transitions from plot point to plot point. If the plot goes something like, they go to get the sword, and then they go to the crystal, and then Sid attacks, and then Sid is defeated, and then the crystal blows up.
No and then. And then. No and then. And then. No and then. And then. No and then. Really starting to piss me off, lady.
If a story is driven by and thens and not therefore or but, then you have a bad narrative. Here's an example. At one point, the party is captured by a judge and taken aboard a large skyship. They bring Ash and her retinue to the judge where he explains what they're going to do with her. Well, during this scene, Vaughn just so happens to be cuffed and carrying the magicite he stole from the palace. The judge sees it and takes the magicite to use for his own purposes. This is a and then plot. Vaughn isn't holding it in his hand for any reason other than the story requires it. The judge takes the magicite, Fran goes berserk, the ship blows up. It's just one and then plot point after another. This usually happens when stories are either rushed or written by multiple individuals. Another gripe I have here is the dialogue. A lot of what's going on towards the beginning seems like intricate political intrigue. Characters throw out big words like Imperial Senate, magistrates, 100 different cities the player has no knowledge of, and conflicts abroad. It all gives a sense of something bigger. But once you get a little further in, you start to see that it sounds a lot smarter than it is. Like here, where Vane off-screen overthrows the Senate. A political body you really only see once. There's no weight to this moment. Or the judges. Sure, people talk about them often. It's even revealed that Balthier was one of them at one point. But what the hell do they even do? You never really get to see them in any judicial role. And they seem to be just as dumb as any other character you run into. Random plot points are brought up throughout the story, like for example the Gareth, who are a strange tribe of nomads. Our party is suddenly told to go talk to them. Here you find out that they have a connection to the Dynast King, but why? It's not like they're relevant at any other point in the story. Or how about Al Cid, who pretty much is a representative of an entire continent, a continent you never see aside from some concept art. Or how about this prophet-like character? I don't even remember his name. This is another and then plot point during the story. I could go on, but I think I've made my point. This is a great game, but the narrative pulls very little of that weight. It's pretty much there because the devs knew a story was required. But luckily, it doesn't get in your way, and for the most part, you're able to ignore it while you go around playing through the true meat of this game, which is, like one, the hunts. If Final Fantasy XII didn't have the hunt system, I'm not sure if there would be much point to spending so much time building up party strategy. Throughout the game, you'll be able to walk into certain establishments and check the hunt board. There, you will accept bounties for unique monsters. In the Hunt Guild, you can also accept unique hunts from the Moogle Mont Block. This is the only worthwhile progression in this game. Now, I do have a few gripes. In order to get a hunt underway, you have to first accept the hunt from the board, then go find the petitioner who posted the hunt. Then you need to go out and find the monster, defeat said monster, then you have to go back to the petitioner. The back and forth gets incredibly tedious and seems a little unnecessary. One other issue I have with the hunts is how stupidly obscure they can be. You're required to do some out-of-the-box stuff in order to get these monsters to appear. But even with both those issues, the hunts were still my favorite part. Once I reached the halfway point and had my characters optimally built and over-leveled, the only challenge this title had to offer were these monsters. In fact, if you play the game outright, it seems to know that this is its true progression. Hunts will often be unlocked once you progress the main story, which says to me that the devs knew they needed to tie both mechanics together or else they would lose the player. Of all the hunts, I think the Hellworm was my favorite. Unlike Yasmet, the Hellworm didn't require the player to use a certain build. I ended up running out of Phoenix Downs during this battle and had to switch my strategy over to using the Revive skill, which sacrificed one character to revive another. The entire fight kept me on my toes without being rigged against me. Grinding through the multiple health bars was challenging, but not overbearing like Yasmet, and at the end of the day, it was a great final hunt. Final Fantasy XII often gets ignored in the broader series. It's an odd title compared to everything that came before and after, trying out different mechanics, art styles, and narrative focus. Due to the dev team's restraint, half these systems didn't go quite far enough, like the Gambit system, lack of battle tracks, or party member diversity. But that aside, the job system of the international version along with the intricate hunt mechanic make this a worthwhile playthrough. I found the party members' interactions to be engaging and wildly entertaining at times, and although the narrative as a whole suffers from terrible writing, Final Fantasy XII seems to understand that it's a game before it's a story. And that's my review of Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age. This is the 12th game on my journey to beating every PS2 RPG. Thank you to all my Patreon members, and if you would like to join the Pro tier and request your own video today, click on the link in the description. Also, don't forget to check out the Google Sheet link in the description of this video as well. This will show you the list of games I've beaten or plan on beating along with their scores. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you all later.